At 6 o'clock on a wet Saturday morning in October of 1995, I found a yellow bulldozer parked beneath the pecan tree my husband planted the day we brought our daughter home from the hospital. 10 minutes later, that same bulldozer pushed through my front gate, and a man I had known for nearly 20 years told me I had no right to stop him. His name was Leonard Baines, president of the Bellamy Shores Improvement Association, and standing there in my old bathrobe was one boot on and one boot half-tied. I realized he had decided my land belonged to everybody but me. Now, I know how that sounds because people hear a story like this and they picture a person marching around with a clipboard, shouting about property lines and calling the police over a fence post. But that was never me. I was 52 years old, worked the front desk at the elementary school in town, drove a faded green Buick that smelled like peppermint gum and old paperwork, and most weekends I went up to that little cabin by Lake Bellamy because it was the only place I could still hear my husband Frank laughing. Frank had been gone 7 years by then. Cancer took him quicker than either one of us knew how to prepare for, and after he was gone, that piece of land became more than a weekend place. It was where I went when the house in town felt too quiet, where I sat on the porch with coffee in the morning and watched the mist lift off the water, where I could still see him in little things, like the crooked birdhouse he nailed to the oak tree, or the old blue rowboat we never got around to repainting. Frank and I bought those 14 acres back in 1971, when Lake Bellamy was still mostly catfish, muddy banks, and families with coolers in the backs of pickup trucks. There was no fancy development then, no polished docks with matching patio furniture, no people calling themselves association presidents like they had been elected governor. It was just wood, water, and a narrow dirt road that turned to soup every time it rained. We loved it. We raised our daughter Annie fishing off that dock. We buried 2 old dogs behind the cedar grove. And we planted that pecan tree after Annie was born, because Frank said every child needed one thing in this world that grew up beside them. So when I looked out that October morning and saw the dozer sitting under that tree, I did not feel angry at first. I felt confused, real confused. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the phone receiver against my ear, the long curly cord stretched halfway across the room, trying to call the county sheriff's office while staring through the window. I thought maybe there had been a road accident. Maybe the county had come to fix something. Maybe somebody had made a mistake. Then I saw the sign. It was nailed to 2 fresh posts just inside my gate, white letters painted on blue wood, and it said Bellamy Shores Community Lake ACCESS. I set the phone down so hard it nearly fell off the counter. I pulled on my other boot, threw a wool sweater over my robe, and walked straight outside. The rain had slowed to that cold little mist Missouri gets in the fall, the kind that settles on your hair and makes you feel damp all the way down to your bones. 2 young men in orange rain jackets were standing beside the bulldozer, smoking cigarettes under the edge of the cab. One of them had a shovel, the other had a clipboard, and Leonard Baines stood between them in a clean tan jacket like he was there for a ribbon cutting. Leonard was 61 then, maybe 62. Always wore pressed slacks, even when everybody else wore jeans. Always had a smile that looked friendly, to listen closely enough to hear what he was saying. He owned the hardware store in town, served on 3 committees, shook every hand at every church picnic, and had spent the last 10 years convincing people that being loud was the same thing as being useful. He looked at me walking down the gravel drive in my robe and boots and said, "Morning, Ruth. Didn't expect to see you this early." I stopped a few feet from him and looked past his shoulder at the torn gate, the ruts in the grass, the fresh gravel already spread across the edge of my property. Then I looked him right in the face and said, "Leonard, why is there a bulldozer in my yard?" He gave me that little smile of his, the one that always made me think of a man offering you a piece of pie with one hand while checking your purse with the other. "It isn't your yard exactly," he said. "Not where the old access route runs. The association has been looking into it, and it turns out this strip was meant for public lake use all along." I remember blinking at him because I honestly thought I had misheard. "Public lake use?" I said. "Leonard, this is my land. My name is on the deed. My fence is around it. My husband planted that tree you parked under." He looked over at the pecan tree like it was a telephone pole. "Well, Ruth, nobody is trying to take your whole place. We're talking about a 15-foot access lane. Folks have needed a closer way down to the water for years. Then they can use the public ramp 3 miles south," I said. "That's what it was built for." Leonard sighed, and that was when I knew he had rehearsed this. "The public ramp is a mess. The county won't maintain it, and families over in Bellamy Shores have been asking for a safer entrance. This road is going to help a lot of people." I looked at the dozer, then at the two boys, pretending not to listen, then back at Leonard. You came onto my property before sunrise, knocked down my gate, and put up a sign calling my land community access. You don't get to hide behind the word help after that. For a second, his smile slipped, just a second. Then he said, you are making this harder than it needs to be. I wish I could tell you I said something clever right then, something sharp enough to slice through his neat little speech and leave him standing there embarrassed in front of those workers. But grief changes people in strange ways. It had been 7 years since Frank died, but there were still mornings when I felt like I had become half a person. And standing there alone in the rain with a man like Leonard acting like I should be grateful he had taken my gate off its hinges, I felt that old uncertainty crawl right up my throat. I wanted to ask somebody if I was crazy. I wanted Frank to come out of the cabin with his coffee mug and say, Ruthie, don't let that fool talk you in circles. But Frank was gone. The bulldozer was there, and Leonard was watching me like he had already decided I would fold. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I walked back inside, picked up the phone, and called the sheriff. Deputy Errol Vance came out about 40 minutes later in a brown county cruiser, rain tapping on the windshield while he stood there looking from my torn gate to Leonard's brand new sign. Harold had been deputy sheriff in our county since the late 70s. He was a decent man, the kind who knew every road by the names locals used for them, instead of the names printed on maps. He listened while Leonard talked about easements and public access and old plats. Then he listened to me explain that I had owned the land for 24 years and had never signed one piece of paper giving anybody permission to cut through it. Harold took his hat off and rubbed the back of his head. Ruth, he said, quiet enough that Leonard could not hear. This is looking like a civil property dispute, unless you can show me something clear right now. I said, I can show you my deed. He nodded. Bring it out. I went into the cabin, opened the old metal file box Frank kept under the bed, and pulled out every piece of paper I could find. The deed, tax receipts, survey copies, even the original sales agreement we signed in 1971 when we were so young we thought 14 acres meant we were practically land barons. Harold looked at the papers for a long time. Leonard kept tapping his foot. The rain kept falling. Finally, Harold handed the papers back and said, these show you own the parcel, but if Mr. Baines is claiming an old right-of-way, I need the county records to settle that. I can't arrest anybody over a road dispute without knowing exactly where the legal line falls. Leonard turned to me then, slow and smug. You see, Ruth, nobody's against you. We are just trying to do what is best for the neighborhood. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside me got quiet. Not calm exactly, but quiet in the way a lake gets quiet before a storm. I said, Leonard, you keep saying neighborhood. I live half a mile outside Bellamy Shores. I do not pay your dues. I do not vote in your meetings. I do not belong to your association. And if you think you can build a road through my land because you printed a sign before breakfast, then you do not know me as well as you think you do. He laughed, not loud, just enough for the workers to hear. We'll see. That was the first day of it. By lunchtime, the bulldozer had stopped, but Leonard had left the sign standing. He told the workers to go home until the paperwork was sorted out, and he drove away in his silver Lincoln with his windshield wipers moving slow and steady like he had all the time in the world. I stood in the mud after he left and stared at that sign. Bellamy Shores Community Lake Access. It had my gate hanging crooked behind it, my grass chewed out by tracks, and Frank's pecan tree covered in wet dirt. I wanted to rip the sign down. Lord knows I wanted to. But I did not. I went inside, made coffee I did not drink, and sat at the kitchen table until dark, staring at those old papers like they might suddenly speak. Around 7 that evening, my daughter Annie called from St. Louis. She had 2 kids by then and a husband who sold insurance, and she always called on Saturdays because that was when she thought I might be lonely. I told her what happened, trying to sound casual about it, trying to make it sound like just another stupid small-town argument. She went quiet for a moment, then said, Mama, did he really bring a bulldozer onto your land? I said, apparently he did. She said, and don't you dare let him make you feel like you're overreacting. I laughed a little, because she sounded so much like Frank when she was mad. Honey, I am not sure what I'm supposed to do. She said, you find out what is true, then you make him live with it. Body, Monday morning I went to work like nothing had happened. I sat behind the front desk at Bellamy Elementary, signed in late buses, handed out band permission slips, taked an ice pack to a 3rd grader's knee after he ran face first into the monkey bars. and smiled at parents who came in smelling like raincoats and coffee. That was the strange part of being a grown woman in a small town. You could be having the worst week of your life and still have to remember where the lunch money envelopes were kept. But all day long, every time the phone rang, I thought it might be Leonard. Every time somebody mentioned the lake, I felt my jaw tighten. Around noon, one of the teachers leaned over my desk and said, "Ruth, is that true what I heard about Bellamy Shores putting in a new launch?" I looked up at her and said, "They are trying to put it through my property." She blinked. "Well, I heard Leonard said the land was public." That was when I learned the second thing about a man like Leonard Baines. He did not wait for the truth to catch up to him. He got there first and sat in its chair. By Tuesday, half of town had heard that I was blocking access to the lake. By Wednesday, somebody had left a note in my mailbox that said, "Let the kids fish." No name, no return address, just those 4 words written in black marker. I stood there on the porch holding that note and felt something hot rise in my chest, because I had spent 20 years letting kids fish off my dock. My own daughter learned to cast a line there. I had given minnows to boys with torn shoes, let neighbors borrow my canoe, helped a girl from down the road catch her first bluegill when she was 8 years old. But Leonard had found the one story people wanted to believe, that a widow with lakefront property was selfish, that a small association needed a favor, that a private person standing in the way of a group must be the problem. So that Thursday, I took a day off work and drove to the county courthouse. The courthouse in Stillwater was one of those old brick buildings with white columns and a bell tower that had not worked right since the 60s. The basement smelled like dust, wet stone, and paper that had been sitting in metal cabinets longer than most people had been alive. I went down there with a thermos of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and every bit of patience I had left. The county clerk was a woman named Marcy Lowell, 50-something, hair sprayed high enough to survive a hurricane, and she had known me since Annie was in diapers. When I told her why I was there, she did not say much at first. She just pulled her glasses down, looked over them at me and said, "Leonard Baines is involved?" I nodded. She gave a little hum. "Then you are going to need the original records, not whatever shiny copy he has been waving around." She led me into the records room, opened a drawer full of rolled maps, and started pulling out plats. Old county surveys, reservoir plans, road records, land transfers, utility easements, all of it yellowed and brittle at the edges. We spent 4 hours looking through them, 4 hours under fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects, 4 hours of my fingers turning black from old ink. At first, all I found was confusion. There had been a county road near my property back in the 1940s, long before Frank and I bought the land. It ran through a narrow strip near the lake, but when the reservoir was built in 1962, the road had been moved because half of it was underwater during flood season. The old route had been officially abandoned, not maybe abandoned, not kind of abandoned, officially vacated by the county. Marcy found the order in a binder from 1963, typed on onion skin paper, stamped with the county seal. The road right-of-way had been released back to the owners of the surrounding parcels. One of those parcels was the land Frank and I bought 8 years later. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I read it again. I said, "Marcy, is this what I think it is?" She smiled without looking up from the page. "It means Mr. Baines has been talking about a road that stopped legally existing before your daughter was born." I should have felt relieved right away. Instead, I felt sick, because that meant Leonard knew better, or at least he had not bothered to check. Either way, he had sent a bulldozer through my gate based on a story he wanted to be true. Marcy helped me make copies, but she warned me that county records alone would not stop him. "He has already got people stirred up," she said. "You need somebody who understands how to put this in front of a judge before he creates a bigger mess." I knew exactly one lawyer well enough to call. Her name was Clara Whitman, and 20 years earlier she had handled my mother's estate after my father died. Clara was 68 in 1995, sharp as a tack, wore little reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had the habit of listening to you in complete silence until you started doubting your own name. I called her from the payphone in the courthouse hallway because the basement phone did not reach outside. When I explained what happened, she let me talk for nearly 10 minutes. Then she said, "Ruth, did he put anything in writing?" I said, "He put up a sign." She said, "Good. Men like Leonard always think the worst thing they can do is make a mistake. They forget the worst thing they can do is leave evidence." I met Clara at her office that afternoon. She read my deed. The old county road order, the map copies, and the photos I had taken of the dozer tracks. Then she leaned back in her chair and asked me something I had not thought to ask myself. "Why this road?" I said. "Because they want a better lake entrance." She nodded slowly. "Maybe, but people do not usually knock down a gate for 15 feet of gravel unless there is more money on the other side of it." That question stayed with me. Why this road? The public ramp was bad, yes, but it existed. The association had other ways to reach the water. Why did Leonard need my land so badly? The answer came 2 days later from a man named Walter Boone. Walter lived 2 properties over from me, retired from the railroad, wore bib overalls every day of his life except funerals, and had a talent for knowing things nobody had told him. He pulled into my drive in an old Ford truck one Sunday morning while I was trying to straighten the bent gate. He sat in his truck for a minute chewing tobacco, looking toward the lake. Then he said, "You know why Baines wants that strip, don't you?" I said, "I have been wondering." Walter spit into a coffee can and said, "Because he promised a developer from Branson a private dock." I stopped what I was doing. "What developer?" Walter looked at me like I had asked what color the sky was. Man named Keeler. Been buying little lots over Bellamy Shores for 2 years. Wants to turn that side of the lake into vacation cabins. But he needs a launch close by, something he can put in a brochure. Leonard told the association he could get one built. I felt cold all over. "How do you know that?" Walter shrugged. "My nephew hauls gravel. Heard Leonard talking at the hardware store. Said he had a woman sitting on a key piece of ground, but she would come around once she saw how much pressure there was." I remember gripping the gate so hard the rust cut into my palm. A woman sitting on a key piece of ground. That was what I was to him. Not Ruth. Not Frank's wife. Not Annie's mother. Not a person with a home and memories and a name on a deed. Just a problem in the middle of his plan. That night, I sat on the porch with the old blue rowboat turned upside down beside the cabin and listened to the water slap against the dock. I thought about selling. I am not ashamed to tell you that. I thought about how easy it would be to call Leonard, name a price, take the money, fix the roof in town, maybe help Annie with the kids, maybe stop waking up at night wondering what new thing he would do next. There is a point in every fight where the other side hopes you will confuse peace with surrender. I sat there a long time and I almost did. Then I looked toward the pecan tree. The bulldozer had scraped one side of its roots, but it was still standing. Bent grass around it, mud on the trunk, but standing. And I remembered something Frank used to say when our old truck would get stuck in the ditch, which happened more than I would like to admit. He would say, "You do not quit just because the ground got soft." The next morning, I went back to Clara's office with Walter's information. Clara made a few calls, sent a clerk to check property filings, and by late afternoon she had something bigger than either of us expected. The developer Walter mentioned had applied for permits to build 18 rental cabins on the Bellamy Shores side of the lake. In the application documents, there was a map showing a planned private boat launch. It was not on association property. It was not near the public ramp. It was drawn exactly where Leonard had sent that bulldozer, cutting straight through my land. Clara put the map down in front of me and said, "This is not about fishing access. This is about increasing the value of a development project." He used the association because people are easier to manipulate when you tell them they are doing something for their children. I said, "Can we stop him?" She looked at me over her glasses. "We can ask a judge to stop him. Whether he listens is another question." The judge granted a temporary restraining order that Friday afternoon. Clara drove out to my cabin with the papers, and Deputy Vance came with us to serve Leonard because the court did not trust him to take it politely. Leonard was standing near the sign when we arrived, talking to 2 men in matching Bellamy Shores baseball caps. He saw the deputy, saw the papers in Clara's hand, and his face changed in a way I will never forget. It did not turn guilty. It turned insulted, like the law had inconvenienced him personally. Deputy Vance handed him the order and explained that all construction had to stop. Nobody could enter my land without my permission, and any continued use of the road could result in contempt of court. Leonard read the first page, folded it neatly in half, and looked at me. "You really want to make enemies out of your neighbors over a little gravel?" he said. I looked at the fresh scar in the grass where the dozer had passed, then at the gate Frank and I had hung together in 1974, now twisted and leaning against the fence. "You made yourself my enemy when you came through that gate," I said. "The gravel just showed me where you were standing." He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it now. "You may win your little paperwork fight, Ruth, but folks around here are going to remember who kept them from the lake." I did not answer him. I wanted to. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought about the kind of man who used children and fishermen and retirees as shields for a real estate deal. But I had started to understand something important by then. Leonard wanted a scene. He wanted me emotional, loud, upset, so he could point at me and say, "There. See, that is the problem." So I stood there in the rain with Clara beside me and said nothing at all. The problem was, Leonard did not stop. Oh, he stopped sending bulldozers for a few days. He stopped driving through the gate. But then he started working on the people. Bellamy Shores held a meeting at the volunteer fire hall the next Tuesday night, and somebody slipped a flyer under my windshield wiper that said, "Save your AACSUS." I went anyway. Clara advised me not to, said I did not owe anybody a defense of my private property, but I told her I had spent too many years sitting quietly at the back of rooms while men like Leonard decided what other people needed. The fire hall was packed. Folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, cigarette smoke clinging to the ceiling tiles, folks murmuring before the meeting even started. Leonard stood at the front beside a hand-drawn map taped to an easel. He had circled my property and read. When I walked in, the room went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then the whispering started. I saw people I had known for years, Mrs. Harlan from church, the Bakers whose son used to mow my lawn, a man named Dale who once borrowed my chainsaw and returned it with the chain backward. I saw all of them looking at me like I'd walked in carrying a locked gate over my shoulder. Leonard cleared his throat and said, "Glad you could join us, Ruth." I sat down in the second row and said, "I am glad I could too. I was curious to hear why my land is on your map." A few people laughed, nervous little laughs. Leonard started talking about lake safety, family recreation, community value, how the old public ramp was too far away, how the association had found a historic access route. He did not mention the developer. He did not mention the cabins. He did not mention the court order. Then he said, "Some people have forgotten that being part of a community means making room for others." I stood up before I even realized I was moving. My knees were shaking, but my voice was steady. "Leonard, I have made room for others my whole life. I have fed half the neighborhood at funerals, driven children to school when their parents' cars would not start, and let strangers fish off my dock when they asked. But you did not ask. You came onto my land before daylight, tore down my gate, and put up a sign claiming something that does not belong to you." He folded his arms. "The association believes the legal history is complicated." I held up the county road order Clara had copied for me. "The county says it is not complicated. That road was closed in 1963. The right-of-way was released. And while we are discussing legal history, maybe you should explain the private boat launch on the development plan submitted by Mr. Keeler." The room changed after that. You could feel it. People stopped looking at me and started looking at Leonard. He said, "That has nothing to do with this meeting." I said, "It has everything to do with this meeting. You told these people you were building access for their families. What you were building was an entrance for rental cabins." A woman in the back asked, "Leonard, is that true?" He looked at her, then at me, then down at the papers in my hand. For the first time, he did not have an answer ready. The meeting ended ugly. Not loud at first, but ugly in that slow, small-town way where people stand in groups and whisper while pretending they are not whispering. Some people came over to me and apologized. Some did not. One man told me I should have handled it privately. I said, "I tried private. He brought a bulldozer." Another woman, Mrs. Harlan, grabbed my hand before I left and said, "Ruth, I believed him. I am sorry." I told her I did too for about 10 minutes. But Leonard was not finished. 2 days later, I found tire tracks on my property again, this time near the lower field where the road would have ended by the water. Somebody had driven around the locked gate at night. They had not built anything, but they had left a pile of crushed stone and a cardboard sign nailed to a tree that said, "Public Waterway. No one can own the lake." That sign made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Leonard. I did not own the lake. I never claimed to. But he kept saying it because it sounded better than the truth, which was that he wanted to own the easiest road to it. Clara filed for contempt the next morning. We also hired a surveyor named Elias Grant, a retired county man who'd worked landlines all over the state since before I was married. Elias was 73. thin as a fence rail, wore a cap that said Bassus pros never retried, and had the kind of slow voice that made people lean in because they knew he would not repeat himself. He spent 2 days walking my property with a transit, measuring tape, old survey pins, and a leather folder full of maps. I followed him around for part of it, mostly because I could not stand waiting inside. At one point he found an iron stake buried under leaves near the edge of the cedar grove. He tapped it with his boot and said, "There she is." I said, "What is that?" He said, "Your corner marker. Been here since 1968. You see that old road Leonard is talking about? It runs 27 feet west of here, mostly underwater now. It never touched this tract after the reservoir project." I asked him if he was sure. He looked offended. "Ma'am, I have been wrong before, but I am not going to start on a Tuesday in the rain." That was the first time I smiled in weeks. Elias made a formal survey map that showed exactly what the county records said. Leonard's supposed access road did not cross my land. It never had, not legally. The line he was using was based on an early preliminary plan from before the lake was even finished. It was like trying to claim your neighbor's living room because an architect once drew a hallway there before the house got built. Then came the final blow. Clara obtained copies of the association's financial records through discovery. Buried in the paperwork were payments from Bellamy Shores to Leonard's hardware store for gravel, lumber, signposts, fuel, and equipment rental. He had used association dues to buy materials from himself, then told residents their money was funding a community project. The road was not just unauthorized, it was profitable for him. That was when even the people who had supported him started getting mad. Not because he had trespassed on my property, at least not all of them. Some people only wake up when they find out somebody has reached into their wallet. The court hearing was set for the first Monday in November. By then, Leonard had one more trick left. He announced a grand opening for the Bellamy Shores community launch on Saturday before the hearing, apparently thinking if he got enough cars and boats onto the road, he could make the whole thing look permanent before anyone stopped him. He printed flyers, bought hot dogs, and told people there would be a small ribbon cutting at 10 in the morning. I found out because Walter Boone brought one of the flyers to my work and laid it on the desk beside the attendance sheets. He said, "Looks like your friend is betting on a crowd." I stared at that flyer for a long time. The red ribbon, printed across the top, the little cartoon boat, the words, "Join you, SFOR, a new ERA Bellamy." Something about it made me tired. Not scared. Just tired of being turned into a problem in somebody else's story. Clara got an emergency order from the judge Friday evening. Deputy Vance called me after dinner and said he had instructions to enforce it. "You do not need to be there tomorrow," he told me. "We can handle it." I thanked him, hung up, then sat in my kitchen for 5 minutes before putting on my coat, because I knew I had to be there, not to yell, not to gloat, I just needed to see it end. The next morning was bright and cold. The kind of blue November morning where every breath hangs in the air and the lake looks like a piece of hammered steel. I got to the cabin around 8:30. The old gate had been replaced, by then, stronger than before, with a new lock Clara had insisted I buy. I parked inside the property and stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in both hands. By 9:15, trucks started gathering down the road. Men in flannel shirts, families with fishing poles, teenagers leaning out of pickup beds, a couple of boats on trailers. I recognized some of them. Some waved when they saw me. Some looked away. Leonard arrived at 9:45 in his silver Lincoln, wearing a dark coat and a red tie like he was about to give a speech at the county fair. He had a folding table set up near the road with a coffee pot, hot dog buns, and a pair of big scissors tied with blue ribbon. For one wild second, I almost laughed. The man had trespassed on private property and still brought ceremonial scissors. At 10 o'clock sharp, he stepped in front of the crowd. I could hear him from my porch. "Friends and neighbors," he said, "today we reclaim something that should have belonged to this community all along. I saw Deputy Vance's cruiser come around the bend before Leonard did, then another county vehicle. Then Clara's old Buick, then Elias Grant in his truck with the survey map rolled under his arm. The crowd got quiet. Leonard stopped talking. Deputy Vance walked up to him, handed him the court order, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mr. Baines, you are ordered to cease all activity related to this access road and remove all association materials from this private property. Nobody is to enter this parcel without Miss Calder's written permission." Leonard did not take the paper at first. He looked over at me standing on the porch, then back at Harold. "This is ridiculous," he said. "These people have a right to the lake." Deputy Vance said, "They may have a right to the lake, Mr. Baines. They do not have a right to get there through her front yard." Leonard turned toward the crowd. "You all see what is happening here. One person thinks she can hold the whole community hostage." And that was when I walked down from the porch. I was not planning to speak. I had told myself I would let the papers speak, let Clara handle it, let the deputy do his job. But Leonard looked at those people like he still believed he could twist the story one more time, and I was done letting him talk for me. I stopped beside the gate, cold air burning in my lungs, and said, "Leonard, nobody is being held hostage. You had a public ramp 3 miles away. You had a county road you could have petitioned to repair. You had a choice to ask me, to negotiate, to tell the truth. Instead, you came here with a bulldozer and tried to make my answer for me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You could have sold that strip and made a good deal. You do not even use that field." I looked at him and said, "That is the thing about land, Leonard. You do not get to take it just because you have decided somebody else is not using it the way you would." Then Elias unrolled the survey map on the hood of Deputy Vance's cruiser. He pointed to the original county road, the abandoned route, the boundary line, the exact place where Leonard's gravel road crossed my parcel. He explained it in plain language, slow enough that every person standing there could understand. The old road was not on my property. The public had no access through my gate. The association had built its project on land it did not own, using money it had spent without honest disclosure. Nobody said much after that. You could hear a child opening a bag of chips near the hot dog table. You could hear a boat trailer chain clinking in the road. Then Mrs. Harlan, who had believed Leonard at the first meeting, looked at him and said, "You told us this was already ours." Leonard's face went red. I was acting in the best interest of Bellamy Shores. Walter Boone, standing near the back of the crowd, said, "Best interest of Bellamy Shores or best interest of that cabin developer?" And that was it. The room he had built around himself for years, the one made of respect and loud opinions and people not wanting to make trouble, cracked right there in the cold. Some folks got back into their trucks and left. Some stayed and argued. A few came over to me and apologized. One man handed me the unused hot dog buns and said, "Might as well not let them go to waste." I took them. I baked bread pudding with some of those buns later that week, which sounds silly now, but sometimes life gives you a strange little souvenir from a battle. Ding. The hearing happened 2 days later, and it was not nearly as dramatic as that Saturday morning. Courtrooms usually are not. No thunder, no big speeches, just fluorescent lights, wooden benches, stacks of paper, and people having to sit still while the truth gets arranged in order. Clara presented the deed, the county road closure order, the survey, the photographs, the developer map, and the association payments. Leonard's lawyer tried to argue that he had acted on a reasonable misunderstanding, but the judge did not seem impressed by that word, reasonable. The judge asked Leonard why he had put up a public access sign before confirming the property line. Leonard said he believed the association had a valid claim. The judge asked why he bought gravel, lumber, fuel, and equipment rentals from his own hardware store using association money. Leonard did not have a good answer. In the end, the court ruled that the association had trespassed, ordered them to remove the gravel and signs, repair the gate and damaged ground, and reimburse me for legal costs. Leonard was personally barred from entering my property without permission, and the judge ordered the association to review its spending records. That part mattered more than I expected. Not because I wanted him ruined. I did not. I was angry, but I was not cruel. I wanted him to understand that power is not something you get to use like a crowbar just because people trust you with it. Bellamy Shores voted Leonard out as president that winter. The developer pulled back from the cabin project when the access plan fell apart, and the county eventually repaired part of the public ramp after enough residents started asking questions. Funny how fast public resources get attention once people realize they have been lied to. As for my land, I planted new grass where the road had been. The pecan tree survived, though one side of its roots stayed scarred for a long time. The following spring, I hung a new birdhouse near it, not because the old one was gone, but because I wanted something there that belonged to me by choice. Annie came down with the grandkids one weekend, and we sat on the dock eating peanut butter crackers while the boys threw rocks into the water. One of them asked me why there was a new gate. I said because sometimes people need a reminder that asking is different from taking. He nodded like that made perfect sense, then asked if he could have another cracker. Kids are good that way. They do not carry a fight longer than it needs to be carried. I wish I could say the whole town agreed with how I handled it. They did not. A few people still said I should have sold the strip and saved everybody the trouble. A few said Leonard meant well and got in over his head. Maybe he did at the beginning. Maybe somewhere along the way he convinced himself that the end mattered more than the way he got there. But I have thought about that a lot since 1995, and here is where I landed. Wanting something for your community does not give you permission to take it from somebody else. Being popular does not make you right. Having a committee, a sign, a meeting, a fancy little speech, none of that turns a wrong thing into a fair thing. Sometimes the hardest part is not standing up to a stranger. Sometimes it is standing up to a person everybody else trusts, especially when they count on you being quiet because you are tired, alone, or too polite to make a scene. I still go to that cabin. I still drink coffee on the porch when the morning fog comes off Lake Bellamy. The gate is stronger now. The grass grew back. The dock still creaks in the same spot Frank always meant to fix. And every fall, when the pecan leaves start turning yellow, I look at that tree and remember how close I came to letting somebody else decide what mattered to me. So tell me what you think. Did I do the right thing by taking Leonard all the way to court, or should I have made peace and sold him that strip of land before the whole town got dragged into it? Was he a man trying to help his community, or a man using the community to get what he wanted? Leave your honest opinion in the comments, because stories like this are never only about a gate, a road, or a piece of property. They are about where we draw the line, and what happens when somebody decides they can cross it without asking.